Welcome to The Deep Dive. We're here to unpack critical sources, the ideas that really shape things.
And today, we're diving into something from the late 19th century that feels incredibly current.
It really does. It feels like you could read parts of this and think it was written yesterday. We're talking social problems, responsibility, who owes what to whom.
Yeah, the parallels are striking. You hear it constantly today, right? These assertions about great social problems, demanding solutions, and how certain groups, often the successful ones, are assailed by oracles, threats, and warnings to fix everything.
There's this heavy sense of mandated duty in the air.
Exactly. And that's precisely what we're digging into today. Our mission is to grapple with William Graham Sumner, a really uncompromising thinker, and his 1883 work, What Social Classes Owe to Each Other.
And he offers a pretty radical reframing, doesn't he? Moving away from those mandated duties towards, well, individual liberty.
He cuts right to the chase. He asks the fundamental question, who gets to demand solutions and who's actually obligated to provide them?
And his answer?
It's stark. He finds the pressure usually comes from, let's say, the less fortunate or less successful. They demand that the rich, the prosperous, the educated, the healthy self, they solve the problem. The goal being essentially to make everyone equally comfortable.
Okay, but then there's the question of how. Who enforces this equal comfort? And that brings us to the state.
Right. And Sumner gets immediately skeptical about the state. This is absolutely crucial to his whole argument.
Why so skeptical? What's his take on the state?
Well, he insists it's not some tutelary genius, this all-wise, benevolent entity floating above us.
It's not Dumbledore, basically.
No. It's simply all of us. That's his definition. And that definition strips the state of any inherent moral authority. It's just a mechanism.
Why is stripping it down like that so important for his argument?
Because if the state is just all of us, then his actions aren't abstract compassion, they are concrete acts. Coercion resource transfers.
It's physical force or collected wealth being deployed.
Exactly. In practice, it boils down to a small group of people elected, appointed, sometimes, as he puts it, some obscure clerk tucked away in bureau, using the power derived from everyone else, the brute force or the industrial force of all of us.
That reframing really grounds it. It takes it out of philosophy and into, well, bureaucracy. The state's power isn't wisdom, it's just aggregated power, sometimes clumsy power.
Precisely. And that leads him to the inescapable conclusion. If the state acts using the force of all of us, then logically it has to benefit some of us.
You can't spend everyone's money or restrict everyone's liberty without someone specific getting the advantage.
All right. So the real question, the gut-level moral question becomes, what should some of us be forced to do for others of us? Or, put simply, what do social classes truly owe each other?
And for Sumner, the idea that one class has an inherent enforceable duty to another, that's not civilization. That's where the problems start.
That's the beginning of moral corruption in his view.
Okay, let's move into that first section. Sumner dives straight into what he sees as a big contradiction, especially in America. We hate the idea of fixed classes.
Oh, absolutely. Americans resent the very notion.
Yet at the same time, we constantly talk about groups like the poor, the weak, the laborers having inherent rights against society.
And that's the contradiction he pounces on. Because when you say a group has rights against society, what you really mean is rights against other people, specifically against other men's labor and their self-denial.
So if someone is entitled to support just by existing, someone else has to provide it.
Right. Someone else must be compelled to provide that support. And the moment that happens, the moment one group can just command another's labor for its own existence.
Then Sumner says you get classes of the most vicious type.
He uses really strong language there. Deliberately provocative. The group demanding support becomes, in his eyes, a privileged person. They live by decree.
And the group forced to provide the support.
They approach the position of a slave. He's making a very deep moral claim here against any kind of forced transfer that, he believes, undermines the producer's dignity.
Using words like slave or plunder. It's pretty intense language for the Victorian era. Was he trying to shock people?
I think absolutely. He needed to cut through the sentimentality that was common then. He wanted to make it crystal clear. Benevolence backed by state power isn't charity. It's force. It's legalized compulsion.
And by using slavery, he's linking it to something Americans thought they'd just fought a war to abolish one person commanding another's productive output.
Exactly. It frames the entire debate in moral terms. which leads directly into his discussion of the huge historical shift that, for him, defines modern freedom, the move from status to contract.
Okay, explain that distinction, status versus contract.
It's a core sociological concept. Medieval society, he argues, was built on status. Everything depended on custom, tradition, inherited position, sentimental ties, permanence. Think lord and serf. Your rights, your duties were fixed by who you were born as, who you were related to.
Got it. And contract?
Contract is the modern world, especially the American ideal. It's rational, realistic, maybe even a bit cold, he admits. It's temporary, based on a specific agreement for a sufficient reason, a voluntary exchange between equals.
So buying groceries is contract, serving a feudal lord is status?
Essentially, yes. And Sumner argues passionately that a society based on contract provides the maximum room for individual growth, self-reliance, and personal dignity. It frees you from the whims of a superior.
And trying to bring back those older, maybe warmer, status-based relationships in the name of social good.
He says that inevitably resurrects the old problems: personal caprice, favoritism, sycophancy, and intrigue, because status relationships are inherently unequal.
That's a really interesting flip. We tend to romanticize those old community ties, but he sees them as fundamentally hostile to liberty because they depend on personal favor, not impartial rules. If you need a favor, you have to.
Contract treats you as an equal, at least in that transaction. Status always implies hierarchy. And this distinction is absolutely vital for understanding his definition of true liberty. He completely rejects the common idea of liberty as just doing as one has a mind to.
Right, because nobody can really do that. Not the tramp, not the czar, as he says. There are always constraints.
Exactly. Liberty for Sumner isn't a feeling or an abstract ideal. It's concrete. It's positive, practical, maintained by specific laws and institutions.
It's a legal status.
Yes, a guaranteed status ensuring that each man is guaranteed the use of all his own powers exclusively for his own welfare. That's the core guarantee.
So if that's liberty, what's the state's job?
Its job is not to make people happy. Happiness is up to the individual. Their powers, their risks, their responsibility.
The state's role is narrower.
Much narrower, but essential. It's to guarantee the conditions or the chances for pursuing happiness. That means peace, public order, and crucially, the absolute security of your earnings. What you make is yours.
So liberty and security aren't just tools to achieve some other social goal. They are the goal.
They are the ends in themselves. You don't compromise them to try and force equal outcomes or universal comfort.
Okay, so that foundation individual responsibility, liberty as a secured status, sets up his critique of what he calls paternal democracy. This leads into Section 2 and his equilibrium principle.
Right. This is central to his political thought. A sound political system, he insists, requires rights and duties to be in balance, in equilibrium.
You can't have one without the other.
Exactly. The system turns immoral the moment any class, and he stresses any class, starts claiming rights while offloading the corresponding duties onto someone else.
We usually think of that applying to, say, aristocrats demanding privileges but not contributing. But Sumner flips this.
He flips it right onto democracy itself. That's his big warning, the potential tyranny of the majority.
How does that work in a democracy?
Well, in a democracy, everyone gets equal political rights, like the right to vote, universal suffrage. But, he argues, the system becomes fundamentally immoral if everyone does not also accept equal political duties.
And what's the main duty?
The duty of self-support. The duty not to interfere with others. The duty to be responsible for yourself.
So the danger isn't monarchy anymore. It's the masses, the numerically powerful class, potentially grabbing all the rights, like rights to benefits, security, while rejecting the duties, like self-reliance, paying their own way.
Yes, and using their political power, their votes, to essentially plunder those who have.
Plunder is a strong word again, but he sees laws that mandate benefits for one group, paid for by forced contributions from another, as just a new version of old-class tyranny.
It's tyranny by ballot box instead of by birthright, in his view.
So he has a message for the average American citizen, the one who proudly calls himself a sovereign.
He does. He says, look, if you claim to be sovereign, if you want no superior and demand equality, then you have to accept the responsibility that comes with it. You cannot escape the deduction that he can call no man to his aid.
If you want independence, you sever the ties that might hold you back, but also the ones you could use to pull others to help you.
Right. The moment a supposedly free sovereign citizen accepts a favor without giving something equivalent back, Sumner says he derogates from his rank. He becomes less than sovereign. he becomes dependent.
Which is why the legal system needs to be impartial, almost cold.
Yes, it must offer the same cold resistance to pleas for special favors based on poverty as it would to pleas based on noble birth. The law shouldn't care if you're poor or rich, just whether you're upholding your contracts and keeping the peace.
And he applies this logic directly to an idea that was gaining ground even then, that the educated and wealthy somehow owe something extra to the uneducated simply because they all share the right to vote.
Yes, this vicious fallacy, as he calls it. Some people saw universal suffrage as dangerous, a peril.
Because the masses might vote foolishly.
Exactly. So the argument went, the good citizens, educated, wealthy, now have a new burden. They must instruct, guide, maybe even provide for the bad citizens, uneducated, poor, to make democracy safe.
And Sumner's response.
He completely rejects it. Liberty and democracy aren't promises of care and protection from the state or from fellow citizens. They come with the exaction of individual responsibility.
If you get the vote, you get the responsibility to use it wisely, to support yourself.
Yes, the state grants equal rights and equal chances precisely because it doesn't intend to give anything else. It's not supposed to prop people up.
But what about systemic issues? Inherited disadvantages? Doesn't this view just ignore the fact that the starting line isn't really equal for everyone?
That's the huge point of tension, isn't it? Sumner would likely argue that trying to legislate equal results or provide security based on someone's starting position, rich or poor, inevitably violates liberty. It means taking from one to give to another based on status, not contract.
So, intervening to correct disadvantages undermines the core principle of securing earnings for the productive person.
That seems to be his stance. He'd say the state's main job is guaranteeing the rules of the game's security of person and property, and then letting individuals run the race. The state's best assistance is getting out of the way because it doesn't intend to carry anyone. Now, to make this whole system of self-reliant liberty morally defensible, Sumner really had to tackle the widespread suspicion of wealth. That brings us to Section 3. His defense of capital, wealth accumulation, and the big figures of industry.
Yeah, this is critical. If being rich is seen as inherently bad, if wealth is just exploitation, then the whole idea of the state protecting earnings falls apart morally. He directly attacks that popular notion, the rich are rich because the poor are industrious.
He calls that economically nonsensical and morally backward. He starts by defining capital. It's not just saved labor. It's saved labor multiplied into itself, raised to a higher power. Think about it from the first tool saved, the first fire controlled. That's capital accumulation.
Without that initial saving and building, we'd still be
in a brute existence, he says. Every single advancement of civilization tools, agriculture, sanitation, schools, science depends entirely on this material base created by capital.
So accumulating capital, which requires self-denial, prudence, not consuming everything immediately, it does more than just secure your own future.
Much more. It buys leisure time, which is essential for thought, for culture. It's the indispensable prerequisite, he argues, for all educational, scientific, and moral goods. You can't have a sophisticated society, spiritually or intellectually, without the material foundation capital provides.
That's a powerful defense. Capital isn't greedy, it's the engine of civilization. And then he moves on to defend the people who accumulate a lot of it, the industrial captains.
Right. He argues we shouldn't regret large fortunes. We need them for society to advance. And the gains of these major capitalists, they should be understood economically as wages of superintendents.
Wages of superintendents. What exactly does he mean by superintendents?
He means the rare talent for organizing and successfully running large, complex businesses. Think big factories, railroads, major trade networks. Sumner stresses how incredibly uncommon this ability is. Exceptional judgment, the courage to take massive risks, the foresight to see where markets are going, and sheer dogged perseverance. Qualities he even describes as sometimes heroic.
Heroic seems like a strong word for a businessman. Why use that?
I think because he sees them as taking risks that could ruin them completely and affect thousands of employees. Success requires immense discipline, thrift, patience, focus, like generals in an economic war. Their reward, the big fortune, isn't just pay, it's the necessary incentive to draw out that rare organizational genius.
He gives the example of A.T. Stewart, the department store magnate. Did Stewart get rich by exploiting his workers?
Sumner says absolutely not. He argues Stewart's employees would have been far worse off without his vision and organization. Stewart created the system, the factories, the stores, the logistics. He provided the one guiding mind which made the whole thing possible.
So the wealth wasn't taken from the employees.
No, he argues Stewart created that wealth, wealth that would not be but for him. He enabled their labor to be far more productive than it could have been otherwise. The system benefited everyone involved, though Stewart, as the organizer, reaped the largest reward for his unique contribution.
So it's not a zero-sum game where the rich get richer by making the poor poorer. It's about expanding the total pie, creating new wealth.
Exactly. And this applies to aggregated capital to joint stock companies, corporations. He saw these as essential tools for tackling the big projects society would need in the future. Trying to limit wealth accumulation arbitrarily would be like killing off our generals in war. It stops vital, large-scale progress just when it's needed most.
Okay, this defense of capital and the organizers sets the stage perfectly for Sumner's most famous idea, the one he's really remembered for, the forgotten man. This is where he pulls back the curtain on who actually bears the cost of all those well-intentioned social schemes.
Yes, and he gives us this incredibly simple but powerful formula. Most philanthropic plans, especially those using state power, follow this pattern. A and B decide what C shall be made to do for D.
Let's unpack those letters carefully, A and B.
A and B are the reformers, the philanthropists, the social doctors. They're full of noble intentions, sympathy, plans to fix things.
And D?
D is the person they intend to help, the recipient, the poor, the weak, the object of the scheme, the social pet, as Sumner sometimes calls them.
And C is the crucial one.
C is the forgotten man, the victim, the one everyone overlooks in this arrangement.
And who is C? Is he necessarily poor?
Not necessarily. C isn't defined by weakness or need. He's the worthy, industrious, independent, and self-supporting citizen. He's the person who just minds his own business, works hard, pays his taxes, maybe struggles but gets by, and doesn't complain because he assumes everyone else is pulling their own weight too.
He's not poor enough to be D, the beneficiary. He's probably working class, maybe lower middle class, just trying to make ends meet through his own efforts. But he's the one who ends up paying for A and B's plan for D.
That's exactly it. When A and B put their plan into action using the state, what actually happens is a transfer of capital. Remember, capital is that force maintaining civilization. It gets taken from the productive C and given to the dependent or inefficient D.
And we need to understand the knock-on effects of that transfer. It's not just money changing hands.
Right. It's about potential, opportunity cost. Explain that economic mechanism. Why does forcing C to pay for D actually hurt C, the productive worker?
Well, think about the capital taken from C. Maybe it's higher taxes. Maybe it's a regulation that increases his costs. That capital could have been used productively. C might have saved it, invested it in his own small business, bought a better tool, or maybe it would have stayed in a company that could have expanded and hired more people, maybe even C.
It's diverted from reproductive use. When it's given to D, who Sumner often characterizes as perhaps shiftless and inefficient, it's simply consumed. It doesn't generate more wealth.
So C loses out. He misses a potential wage increase, maybe a job opportunity, or the chance for cheaper goods that productive investment would have created. The person who really suffers from benevolence aimed at D is often the industrious C.
He gets completely passed over. His sacrifice isn't even noticed. Sumner gives some really vivid examples. Take the drunkard, D, lying in the gutter.
Okay. A and B are concerned.
Right. So A and B decide C should pay taxes for the policeman to pick up the drunkard, the doctor to patch him up, maybe the jail or workhouse to house him.
What's the effect?
It saves D from the immediate natural consequences of his actions, which Sumner argues might just allow D to continue his destructive behavior, maybe even worsen it. Meanwhile, C bears the cost financially and maybe morally by sustaining this cycle.
And it's not just money C loses. It can be liberty too, right? Like with prohibition laws.
Exactly. A and B decide that because D might drink irresponsibly, C should be forced to be a teetotaler or have his access restricted.
Even if C uses his liberty responsibly.
Yes. C is the honest person who enjoys a drink moderately, abuses nothing, but his freedom gets curtailed to manage D's lack of self-control. Sumner saw this as a profound insult to the responsible, self-governing individual.
He makes a similar argument about trades unions creating monopolies.
Right. A union might manage to raise wages for its members, who could be seen as a mix of A and D in this formula, organizing to benefit themselves. But how do they often do it? By restricting apprenticeships, limiting who can enter the trade.
Creating an artificial scarcity of skilled labor.
Which benefits those inside the union, sure. But who does it harm? It harms C, the forgotten man, the young worker who wants to learn that trade, but is shut out. He's pushed into unskilled labor, where there's more competition, driving wages down there. C bears the hidden cost of the union's artificially high wages.
And then there's the biggest evil, Sumner says, jobbery. This is where the political system itself is used to extract wealth from C. Define jobbery.
Jobbery is basically using political influence to get rich by taking from others, disguised as some kind of legitimate enterprise or public good. It's not honest work, it's manipulating the system. Think unnecessary public works projects that enrich contractors, internal improvements that mainly benefit specific landowners, or a huge issue in his day, protective tariffs.
Tariffs. That brings us to that really sharp, painful example he uses, the forgotten woman and the tax on thread.
Yes, this makes the whole thing incredibly concrete. He talks about women stitching corsets, maybe earning just 75 cents for a long day's work. They need thread.
An essential material for their job.
Exactly. But there's a high tariff, a tax, on imported thread to protect domestic thread manufacturers, A and B, the beneficiaries of the tariff. He calculates that maybe 24 minutes of the woman's labor should be enough to buy a spool of thread.
But because of the tax,
she has to work an extra 16 minutes just to pay the government's levy, which goes to prop up the protected industry.
So the factory making the thread, instead of making it cheap and accessible, effectively becomes an institution for making it harder for this woman to get what she needs.
Precisely. And who pays this hidden cost? Not the wealthy factory owner benefiting from the protection. It's paid by these scattered, insignificant peasants and laborers, like the corset stitcher, who have to work longer for the basic materials of their livelihood. C, the forgotten man or woman, carries the entire weight of this policy, unseen and unacknowledged.
Okay, so Sumner has diagnosed the problem, this constant meddling by social doctors, A and B, trying to fix D at C's expense. What's his solution? This brings us to Section 5, and it's refreshingly direct.
It really is. He starts by criticizing those social doctors again. He says these amateurs always leap straight to proposing remedies without really understanding the problem, and crucially, without thinking about the unintended consequences, the ulterior effects.
And often the problems they're trying to fix
are actually the result of previous meddling. They're the complicated products of all the tinkering, muddling, and blundering of social doctors in the past.
So the solution isn't more tinkering.
Exactly. The solution is radically simple. Stop. Society, he argues, needs most of all to be let alone.
He takes the famous French phrase, laissez-faire,
and translates it into blunt English. Mind your own business. For Sumner, this isn't just an economic policy slogan. It's the fundamental sociological principle for a healthy society.
Mind your own business is the highest social duty. That sounds almost antisocial.
He argues the opposite. The most beneficial thing any person can do for society as a whole is to take care of themselves and their own family properly. That sphere, he says, is a charge capable of infinite development. It demands all your energy and wisdom.
If everyone focuses on managing their own small sphere well,
then the entire social mechanism runs smoothly and efficiently. The danger of trying to mind other people's business is twofold. First, you inevitably neglect your own business, which is the only one you truly understand and control. And second, it's usually just impertinent interference in someone else's life.
So the best reforms
would simply be undoing the work of statesmen in the past, repealing bad laws, removing interference.
But critics would immediately call this heartless. What about genuine need? Where does sympathy or helping others fit in if the state can't do it?
He's very clear on this. Mutual aid, sympathy, charity, these belong strictly in the realm of private and personal relations. They should be driven by individual conscience and pity, not by impersonal state coercion.
He uses that analogy of the man hit by a falling tree.
Yes, we help that person out of common humanity, recognizing our shared frailty and folly. We're all potentially careless. It could be us next time. It's about mutual respect and personal connection.
So private charity, yes. State welfare programs, no. Because the latter rely on taking from C by force?
That's the core distinction. And even within private help, Sumner is cautious. He says the only kind of help that is generally wise or expedient is help that
helps a man to help himself.
Exactly. Opening opportunities, sharing knowledge, maybe providing a temporary loan to get someone started, opening the chances, but not just giving handouts, which he sees as merely transferring C's capital to D without requiring any responsibility or effort from D.
He believed real social progress wasn't the result of direct top-down reform efforts anyway.
No, he saw true social improvement as indirect, a product and a growth. Things like better transportation, advances in medicine, cleaner government through civil service reform. These do far more for the poor in the long run by improving the overall conditions of life for everyone than any grand rhetorical scheme aimed specifically at redistributing wealth. So what is the final fundamental duty we do owe each other in society?
It comes back to guaranteeing the framework for liberty, the mutual redress of grievances through law, and the guarantee of chances, not results.
Chances, not results. That's key. He critiques socialism on this point. If you say people have a right to property or a certain standard of living, you're implicitly saying someone else has an obligation to provide it for them.
Whereas equality before the law
will naturally lead to unequal outcomes because people have different talents, different levels of diligence, different luck. But for Sumner, that inequality of outcome is right and just because the results are proportioned to the merits of individuals operating within a fair system of law.
So looking back at Sumner's whole argument and what social classes owe to each other, the enduring message seems to be this tight linkage between liberty, responsibility, and a specific kind of justice.
Absolutely. Liberty and justice are inseparable for him. And that means if we reject the old idea of privileged classes demanding things based on birth, we also have to reject the new idea of classes demanding benefits based purely on need or perceived disadvantage.
Because both violate the principle of equal rights and equal duties.
Right. Differences in outcome based on things like thrift, hard work, prudence. These aren't flaws in the system to be corrected by the state. They are the natural, inevitable, and even desirable results of individual liberty itself.
He really strips away all the sentimentality, doesn't he? He leaves you with the stark economics and the moral logic. Self-reliance is the foundation, not state-mandated compassion.
And the state's role isn't to create virtue or wealth. It can only shuffle around what individuals produce. And in that shuffling, he argues, it inevitably punishes the productive C. It encourages dependency in D.
And the key to protecting liberty is always keeping an eye on C, the forgotten man, protecting his rights, his earnings, his duties.
Yes. The moment we turn to the state, all of us, to solve the problems of some of us, the burden falls squarely on that quiet, industrious citizen who's just trying to mind his own business.
His final warning feels incredibly relevant today. That yearning for equal results, he traces it back to less noble motives.
He bluntly calls it the offspring of envy and covetousness, often dressed up as compassion. And he warns that every plan designed to enforce that equality ultimately involves robbing Peter, A, or maybe C, to pay Paul, D, and in the process it wastes capital and chips away at the moral fiber of society.
So the real test of a free society, for Sumner, isn't how much the state does for the less fortunate through coercion.
No. It's how fully that society protects the constitutional liberty and the earned property of the forgotten man, the productive engine of it all.
So, a provocative thought to leave our listeners with. The next time you hear a call for collective action, a plan that sounds good but requires the state's muscle, ask Sumner's question.
Who is C? Who is the forgotten man in this equation? Who actually ends up paying the price?
And then perhaps remember his simple, challenging advice for maintaining a free and moral society. Mind your own business.
It's a stark challenge to how we often think about social responsibility today. Definitely something to chew on.
Indeed it is. We'll leave you with that thought. Well, that's about all the time we have. You've been listening to The Deep Dive from Wake Up and Smell the Freedom, where ideas percolate. Thanks for joining us as we continue to explore the ideas that shape liberty and continue to shape us today. Remember, the pursuit of liberty begins with understanding, and understanding begins with asking the right questions. Until next time.
Bye-bye.